My name is Evelyn Hartman. I'm 78 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family was the safest place a person could rest their heart. That belief cracked wide open on a bright summer afternoon by the lake shore in Clearwater, Ohio. The air smelled of sunscreen and fried food from a nearby stand, children's laughter mixed with the crash of the waves, and my 3 adult children were only a few yards away, watching over their own kids as they played in the sand. I remember shielding my eyes from the sun, smiling at the sight, when my phone buzzed in my hand. The message on the screen was short, sharp, and terrifying. Leave quietly. Don't tell your children. For a second, I thought it was a mistake, some wrong number. But then my chest tightened. My hands shook as I lowered the phone into my lap, glancing toward Daniel, Clara, and Michael. They were laughing together, sipping cold sodas as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. I wanted to believe nothing was wrong, yet something in those 5 words clawed at me, whispering that my life was in danger, and the danger was sitting only a few steps away. I looked up again and saw Maribel, my housekeeper, standing farther down the boardwalk. Her dark hair whipped in the wind, and when our eyes met, she nodded once, firm, urgent, then turned and began walking away. It was her. She had sent the message. My heart hammered against my ribs. My instinct was to call out, to ask what was happening, to ask my children if they had seen her. But the warning echoed in my head. Don't tell your children. So I rose slowly, forcing a smile I didn't feel, brushing sand from my skirt as though I were only stretching my legs. I told my grandchildren I would grab a lemonade. I waved casually at my kids. None of them seemed to notice anything unusual. Then I turned my back on the laughter of my family and followed Maribel down the boardwalk, my pulse racing, each step pulling me deeper into a mystery I wasn't ready to face, but knew I couldn't ignore. I followed Maribel down the boardwalk, every step echoing louder than the gulls overhead. My hands trembled, so I pressed them into the folds of my skirt to steady myself. I had known Maribel for years. She came into my life after Harold passed, and though she was officially just the woman who cleaned my house, she became much more. Someone I trusted. Someone who often reminded me of the students I once taught. Earnest, steady, and full of life. When she slipped into a small coffee shop off the main street, I pushed the door open behind her. The scent of roasted beans filled the air, and the bell above the frame jingled as if announcing the beginning of something I would never be able to undo. Maribel motioned me quickly to a booth in the corner, her eyes darting to the door before she leaned across the table. "Mrs. Hartman," she whispered, her voice trembling but urgent. "You can't go back there. Your children. They are planning something terrible." Her words felt impossible, absurd, even cruel. My children? The same 3 people I had carried inside me, the ones Harold and I had raised with such care? I shook my head. No, that can't be right. Daniel, Clara, and Michael. They wouldn't. They would. She cut in, sliding a small folder across the table. Her hand shook as she did it. They already have. Look. Inside were documents I recognized too well, bank statements from my own account, legal papers bearing my signature, except I knew I hadn't signed them. My chest tightened as I traced the familiar curl of the E in Evelyn, copied so precisely it was almost perfect. Almost. "They've been drugging you," Maribel said, lowering her voice. "The wine they pour for you at dinners, it's laced. I found empty blister packs of sedatives in the trash. They waited until you were groggy, then had you sign papers transferring nearly $1 million. I overheard Daniel talking on the phone with a man named Victor Delgado. He owes him a lot. And Victor doesn't wait." The cafe around us blurred. The clinking of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine. All of it receded as a roar filled my ears. My children. My own children. I tried to steady my breathing, gripping the folder. A cold fury slid under my skin, mixing with disbelief and grief. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because they're desperate," Maribel said. "The deadline is coming soon. They're planning what they called an accident. Something about the stairs, maybe even the bathtub." I couldn't keep quiet. "I won't let them do this to you." Her eyes shone with something between fear and determination. For a moment, I saw her not as my housekeeper, but as my protector. I wanted to run, to scream, to march back onto that beach and demand answers from the people who shared my blood. But Maribel reached across the table, catching my wrist. "Please, if you go back now, they'll know I told you, and you'll be in even more danger." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. Betrayal is a strange thing. It doesn't stab all at once. It seeps in, slowly, suffocating every memory. I thought of Harold again, his quiet faith in family, how he would sit at the dinner table and say, "As long as we have each other, we'll be fine." What would he say now? The bell above the door jingled again, and instinctively I pulled the folder close to me. No one familiar walked in, just a couple of teenagers with surfboards under their arms. Still, my heart raced. Maribel's voice hardened. "You can't fight this alone. I've already contacted the police. They'll know what to do, but they'll need your help." I looked into her eyes, wide with fear but burning with loyalty. I knew my life had just tilted into a place from which it could never return to normal. And in that booth, with the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, I whispered the words that sealed my next step. "Tell me everything." The moment Maribel said the police were involved, a cold shiver ran down my back. It was one thing to suspect betrayal, another to have officers of the law waiting to confirm it. My heart still begged for denial, but my hands clutched the folder as if the truth inside might steady me. Later that afternoon, Maribel drove me in her small sedan to the local precinct. The hum of the engine filled the silence between us, broken only by the sound of my shallow breathing. I kept watching the streets blur past, the familiar shops and houses of my community suddenly strange, as though the whole world had shifted. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A man introduced himself as Detective Samuel Rhodes. He was tall, with silver hair at his temples and the calm, measured tone of someone who had seen every kind of human failure. He shook my hand gently, then motioned for me to sit. "Mrs. Hartman," he began, his voice low, "I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone. We've reviewed what Maribel brought us, the forged documents, the bank transfers, even the recordings of your son speaking to Delgado. It's serious, and it means your life is in danger." The words landed like stones in my stomach. My children's names on forged papers, my children's voices on secret recordings. Every fiber of me wanted to scream that it wasn't true, yet the evidence spread across the detective's desk didn't lie. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice brittle. He leaned forward. "We can stop them, but we need a direct confession, something undeniable in their own words. With your permission, we'd like to wire you. Hidden audio and video. You meet with your children. We listen. Once they admit to their plan, we'll have the grounds to move in. Without it, they could claim misunderstanding or pin everything on Delgado. We can't risk that." The idea of walking into a trap with my own flesh and blood felt unbearable. "You're asking me to sit in a room with them, knowing what they intend to do to me?" "I'm asking you to survive this, Mrs. Hartman," he said gently, "and to help us bring them to justice. We'll be right outside. The moment we hear enough, we'll act." I pressed my palms together, whispering a prayer I hadn't said in years. Harold's face came to me again, steady and kind. He would have told me to be brave. He would have reminded me that truth always wins in the end. I lifted my chin. I'll do it. The next day was a blur of preparation. A technician fitted me with a small recording device, hidden in the clasp of a necklace I often wore. Another tested the tiny camera disguised in the button of my cardigan. They explained how everything worked, how I didn't need to do anything except be myself, and how a simple tap on my wrist would signal distress if I felt unsafe. Maribel stayed with me the entire time, holding my hand when my nerves made it shake. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. By evening, everything was set. Daniel had invited me for dinner at his house, a family meal, just the four of us. My children thought it was their stage, their performance to keep me compliant. They didn't know it was also a stage wired for truth. When the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple, I sat in the back of a police van parked down the street from Daniel's house. Detective Rhodes gave me one last look through the open door. "Remember, you're not alone. We'll be listening." I stepped out, the night air heavy with summer heat, and walked toward the porch light glowing ahead. My stomach clenched as I reached for the doorknob. Whatever happened inside those walls would change my life forever. Daniel's house smelled of garlic and rosemary when I stepped inside, a scent that once would have comforted me. Now it felt like a mask, something laid over the air to distract from the poison underneath. He kissed my cheek, a little too quickly, and led me to the dining room. Clara was already pouring wine, her smile bright but her eyes darting nervously. Michael carried a basket of bread, setting it down with a thud heavier than necessary. We gathered around the table as though it were any other family dinner, the clatter of silverware, the scrape of chairs, the low hum of forced conversation. I kept my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. I wondered if they could hear the small device humming quietly against my skin, or see the tiny light I prayed was invisible. Daniel raised his glass. "To family," he said. My stomach turned. I touched my glass but didn't drink. The wine glowed ruby red, and all I could think of was Maribel's warning about the sedatives. I forced a smile instead. "To family," I echoed, though the words burned on my tongue. As the meal went on, their words began to tangle. Clara asked if I'd been feeling tired lately, her tone too sweet, her eyes too sharp. Michael muttered something about how I should be more careful on the stairs. Daniel hushed him with a look, but I caught the slip. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I decided to push. "You three have been so attentive lately," I said, my voice light, almost as if you're preparing for something. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Clara set down her fork with a clink. Michael looked at Daniel, waiting for direction. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me with eyes that had once reminded me of Harold's, but now felt colder, calculating. "You don't need to worry about anything, Mom," he said finally. "We've got everything under control. Soon, all of this, your accounts, the house, it'll be settled. No more stress for you." My pulse hammered. "Settled how?" I asked. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "She deserves to know," he muttered. "Shut up," Daniel snapped, but Clara's voice cut in, trembling. "We don't have a choice. Daniel, Victor's deadline is in 3 weeks. If we don't deliver, we're done." I felt the air leave my lungs. There it was, clear, undeniable. My children were talking about me as though I were a problem to be solved, a debt to be paid. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back. I needed them to keep talking. "So this is about money?" I asked softly. "About Victor Delgado?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. We tried everything else, but we can't keep carrying this weight. Once it's done, once the accident happens, it'll all be over. You'll rest." The word accident hung in the air like smoke. My heart cracked, but I kept my face still. The necklace against my skin felt heavy, every second ticking toward salvation or disaster. Then Clara's eyes flicked to me, narrowing. "Why aren't you drinking your wine, Mom?" For a heartbeat, the room spun. I gripped the edge of the table, praying they couldn't see the terror blooming in my chest. My mouth opened, but no words came. And in that fragile pause, I knew the danger had sharpened. They were beginning to suspect. The silence after Clara's question pressed down like a storm cloud. I forced my lips into a thin smile, lifting the glass halfway to my mouth before setting it back down. "I've had enough tonight," I murmured. "Doctor's orders. You know how it is at my age?" Daniel's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice dropping low. "You're not as fragile as you let on, are you? You've been listening, paying attention." My throat tightened. I felt the necklace grow heavier, as though it could betray me at any moment. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Michael pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs screeching against the hardwood. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. "She knows something." His hand shook as he ran it through his hair. "What if she tells someone? What if Delgado finds out we can't go through with it?" "Sit down," Daniel barked, but Clara's voice cracked through the air. "No, Michael's right. She knows. Look at her. She's not scared enough. She's hiding something." I gripped the table, praying silently that Detective Rhodes and his team were listening, that they'd heard enough. Then Daniel's gaze dropped to the clasp of my necklace. His face shifted, hardening. "What's that?" I froze. "It's the same necklace I've worn for years," I said, my voice steady though fear gnawed at me. He leaned across the table, his fingers reaching out, and in that instant I tapped my wrist just as Rhodes had instructed. A faint vibration passed through the device, my signal. Before Daniel could touch me, the sound of boots thundered through the hall. The front door burst open, shouts filled the air, and red-blue lights flared against the walls. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" The room erupted into chaos. Clara screamed. Michael stumbled backward, knocking over his chair. Daniel cursed, his fists clenched, but there was nowhere left to run. Officers swarmed in, guns drawn, voices commanding. I sat frozen, breath coming in shallow gasps, as the scene unfolded around me. Daniel was pinned against the wall, his wrists yanked behind his back. Clara sobbed as handcuffs clicked over her wrists. Michael sank to his knees, pale and trembling, tears streaking his face as he muttered, "I didn't want this. I didn't want this." Detective Rhodes appeared in the doorway, his expression grim but steady. He crossed the room and crouched beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. "It's over. Mrs. Hartman, you're safe now." Safe. The word rang hollow. My children were being dragged out in chains, their faces twisted with fear and rage. Blood of my blood. The very people I had once sung to sleep, now shouting as officers read them their rights. I pressed my hands to my face, tears breaking free at last. Betrayal and relief clashed inside me, a storm of emotions that left me shaking. I had survived, but something sacred had shattered forever. As they led Daniel past me, he turned his head, his eyes burning into mine. "You think you've won," he spat, "but you lost us. You lost your family." The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. I wanted to scream back that they had thrown family away long before tonight, but the lump in my throat held me silent. The officers ushered them out into the night. The house that had moments ago smelled of garlic and rosemary now reeked of fear and failure. I sat there at the table, staring at the spilled wine seeping into the tablecloth, as though it were the last remnant of the life I once believed in. And in the ringing quiet, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks that followed blurred into a haze of interviews, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Every morning I woke with the same question gnawing at me. How could my children, the ones I carried and fed and clothed, have plotted to end my life? Some days the grief was heavier than my bones, and I wondered if survival was a blessing or a curse. Detective Rhodes kept his word. He stayed in touch, visiting me often, explaining each step of the process in simple terms I could bear. The district attorney built the case brick by brick. The recordings, the forged documents, the bank transfers, the evidence of drugs found in my kitchen trash. It was airtight, Rhodes said, but airtight did not ease the ache in my chest. Months passed before the trial began. The courthouse in Clearwater was an old red brick building, its columns weathered by decades of rain and sun. On the first day, I sat in the front row, Maribel beside me, clutching my hand. The sight of Daniel, Clara, and Michael being led in, shackled, was a wound I wasn't ready for. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of their bravado, their clothes exchanged for prison uniforms. Still, when Daniel glanced at me across the room, the defiance in his eyes had not dimmed. The proceedings were methodical. Witnesses testified, handwriting experts, bank clerks, even neighbors who recalled the strange comings and goings at Daniel's house. Then the recordings played, voices I knew as well as my own, discussing the accident, the stairs, and Victor Delgado's deadline. I closed my eyes as the jury listened, the betrayal cutting fresh each time. Victor himself was arrested weeks earlier in a raid. His empire of predatory loans crumbled under the weight of evidence. Seeing him in the courtroom, hunched and scowling, reminded me that my children had tied themselves to a man who thrived on desperation and fear. When the verdict was finally read, my breath caught. Guilty on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and financial fraud. Each of my children was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Delgado and his men received even harsher terms. As the gavel struck, I felt no triumph, only a hollow release, like air leaving a balloon. Justice had been done, but justice was not joy. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the silence pressing around me. Maribel made tea, her daughter Lucia humming softly as she colored at the table. Watching them, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, it's the ones who choose to stand by you when the rest of the world falls away. In the months that followed, I created a trust for Maribel and little Lucia. They had given me back my life. It was only right I gave them security. But I wanted more than that. I wanted to take my pain and shape it into something that might save others. So I founded the Herald Center, named for my late husband, a place for seniors facing financial abuse to find protection, resources, and community. We opened in a modest brick building downtown, the first day. As I cut the ribbon with trembling hands, I felt Harold's presence beside me, proud and steady. The work healed me piece by piece. Each story I heard, each widow nearly conned, each retiree bullied by greedy relatives reminded me I was not alone. My wounds became bridges, carrying me toward others who needed hope. One evening, I sat in the garden outside the center, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in gold and lavender. Lucia ran through the grass, laughing, Maribel watching her with a smile. I held a photograph of Harold in my lap, tracing the lines of his face with my finger. "We kept our promise," I whispered. "We protected what mattered. We turned the worst thing into something good." For the first time in months, the weight in my chest lifted. The betrayal of my children would always scar me, but it no longer defined me. What defined me was survival, truth, and the family I had chosen. And as the evening breeze stirred the roses at my feet, I finally felt at peace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day